Hey everyone, and welcome back, you guys. I'm so excited. We are talking with Reverend Daniel today, and he is going to share with us about living vibrantly. And you might think, what does this have to do with homeschooling? I mean, living vibrantly, that sounds like something I want to do. And it just in general as a person. So I wanted to share them with you because it also really relates to lifelong learning and raising leaders. Because if we are going to raise leaders, we need to be vibrantly living ourselves. And that is a great example to share with our kids and to show them the path that it takes to overcome all those obstacles and get better and grow. And that helps our kids know the journey themselves, and they're moving on that journey as they're growing and as we're moving through our homeschool. And it also creates a really beautiful culture. You guys, this is something that I've done with my family for my son's entire life. We've been studying leadership and success principles for over 20 years, my husband and I, and it has impacted the way that my son looks at the world, looks at himself, and he is constantly in self-reflection, constantly growing, and constantly has a hunger to grow. He's 16. I don't know many 16-year-olds that do that. And I'm just saying that it's the culture that we've created through our own vibrant living. And I know Reverend Daniel is the expert on this because he actually moves people through the process and through their breakthrough points of living vibrantly. So I'm very excited to have him on with us today. And Reverend Daniel, can you please share with us a little bit about your background and why are you so excited about living vibrantly?
Yes, thank you, Cami. Thank you so much for having me. And well, I'll tell you that, the first thing that comes to mind related to what you just asked is when I was 4 years old, living in just outside of Portland, Maine, hot summer day. I was out in the front yard of my family home. Back in the house, my family was doing what they usually do, which was yelling and screaming and throwing stuff. Sometimes my older sister Casey would sit out front with me and talk to me, so I wasn't hearing so much of that. But this particular dusty day was totally quiet. I was alone, and I heard the sound of a bottle smash against the wall. Then I heard my mother scream at my father, "You drunk!" I won't say the rest of it. It's a family show.
It is.
And I did not know the word epiphany at 4 years old. However, I got my first one in that moment, and it was, there must be more to life than this. And that message, which just came out of nowhere for me in that moment, has come back to me from the divine, from other life experiences so many times that it got clear for me eventually. Not only is that an epiphany, that's my mission, right? My mission is to help all of us create more freedom, love, and vibrancy. We're here to live a vibrant, thriving life. It's our birthright, and I would even say it's our destiny.
I completely agree with that 100%. I am all about that. What an incredible story. I was actually listening to several people in a speaker event that I was at last week share a lot of their stories from childhood. And it's amazing at such a young age how those things can really trigger for us and really give us a new perspective on things. I love that you shared that. Thank you. And I want to think about, as you're talking vibrant living, what does that even mean? What does it mean to live vibrantly? What does it mean to you?
Well, when I was a kid, on the refrigerator, there was a magnet and it had a quotation from Christopher Morley. And it said, "There is one success in life, and that is to live one's life as one chooses." Right. And so for me, in my mission, freedom is the first part, because what it means is we get to choose what we want to do, right? Where we wanted to go to school, what we want to study, where we want to put our attention, who we hang out with, what experiences we create, right? Because most of the world not doing that. Most of the world is, stepping along and following in what they're supposed to be doing, stuff they fell into by default. And if you ask most people, they're like, like, eh. I call it the cult of meh.
So true. So true. I love that. That average, like, mediocrity thinking of just the apathy. I saw a lot of that when I was teaching in high school. There was so much just the air of apathy. Even the kids that were striving to check boxes. You guys know I talk a lot about that. And it wasn't a striving from the internal sense of I want to get better. It was the I want to accomplish this so I can get a good grade because everybody expects me right? It's a lot of external. Yeah, there was an internal motivation to check a box so that they can, right? But it wasn't necessarily an inner fire. And I love that you're talking about that. And I love that you also mentioned freedom, because you guys know I'm the freedom scholar. That is what I'm all about. I love freedom. Means so many things to me. It means also freedom from and freedom to. So freedom from it means a lot of things, and especially with homeschooling as well. But that freedom to choose your own life. And so when you're vibrantly living, you have that freedom. I love that. Is there a way that, so say that we have a job, we have all these constraints put upon us. How do we live vibrantly in that, with those constraints of we're not necessarily 100% free with our time?
Well, yes, then I will be a bit radical, maybe provocative in a sense. And the first thing that I say to that is we need to be more honest and say nothing is put upon us. Now, that's not the entire truth, right? Because in life, it's all a co-creation, right? We've got weather and other people and politics and economy and all of that. However, one of the core beliefs, perspectives I use is I create everything, right? And again, it's not the entire truth. However, there's power in it. It's useful. So if I look at, or, use the example, if somebody says, I've got this constraint, this constraint, this constraint, my first question is, how did you create that? Right? How did you create that? That is what your experience is right now, right? Not as a way to blame or put down, and nothing like that, as a way to say, yeah, you know what? At the very least, the softer version is I contributed to that in some way, right? I didn't go for this thing over here. I didn't speak up about this thing over here, right? I allowed this thing to flow over here. And once we get honest and we say, yeah, I contributed, I created that, whoa, then we have power, because then we could say, okay, well, what would I love to create instead? And it's all possible. We know that.
That is such a huge point, you guys. I literally had this conversation with my son just a couple of days ago. In fact, it might even have been yesterday. Oh no, it was about 2 days ago. So he was doing some reading, and it was some reading that he was kind of bored with, and he didn't really want to finish at the time, because then, it was a little boring to him at the time. He did want to finish it. He wanted to accomplish it. He likes the content. However, it wasn't the most engaging thing that he was reading. So it was a little challenging. And he had sat there for a really long time doing nothing. And I'm like, dude, you've sat here for it was like over an hour just sitting there staring. And I was like, really? What? He's like, well, I was thinking about why why I'm so stuck, why I have so much trouble. And I said, and he was like, I was thinking about how to overcome that. And I said, okay, well, let's think about that. Let's think about that. You know how to overcome it, right? You know what to do. Don't you know what to do? Well, yeah, I know what to do, but I mean, I keep getting stuck, and and I said, so if you know what to do, isn't that all that matters? You just made a choice not to do it.
Hmm.
And he was like, but I'm just saying, I did make a choice, and I do want to do it. But I get stuck, and it's not working. And I said, but it is working, because you know what to do, and it has worked before, right? You just take action. You just read it, right? You just make a choice. And I said, you're just not taking ownership of the fact that you didn't you're not doing the action, right? And he was like, he took him a little bit, but he was like, you're right. Yeah, I do need to. And it's so transformational when you can get to that point with your kids. I love that you mentioned that, because it is really about taking ownership of your choices. And even though we don't think we're making a choice like that, like that wasn't my choice, you'd be surprised how right, how much is your choice and what isn't. So I love that you say that. And in talking about living, how do we make those changes then? If we're living in a place where we've made some choices that we don't want, how do we, I mean, some of those choices are hard, right? Especially if we're talking about leaving a job or, doing something like that. You work with people all the time breaking through hard choices and to get what they want. So how do you do that?
Well, I mean, the next question, or maybe it's even the previous question for me, and I live by questions, right? This is what I do: is I ask questions that help us to see ourselves in the world differently. So the one of the very first questions for me always is, what would you love to create? Right. And so if we go with your son, right, maybe, I don't know, maybe you said, I don't like feeling stuck, right? I don't want to be stuck. Okay, well, what would you love to create? Well, I'd like to be engaged, or I'd like to be finished with this, or I'd like to be excited. I don't know, something like that. And say, okay, well, what's in the way of that? Right? What's getting in the way of that now? Right? Well, it might be, I think it's boring, or I'm not as excited, or I'm tired, or okay. And then my favorite question, once we're clear about where we want to go, what we want to create, is, well, not so much how do you do it, it's who would you need to be, right? Who would you need to be so that you were engaged or excited or complete with it? And I love that question, because we get caught often in the how, right? People call it the cursed hows, or the tyranny of how. And we're down here trying to work it out, but there's a source up here, right? And we can clean up a river down here, but if it's polluted up here, it's still gonna, it's gonna get dirty down here again quickly. So who we are being, our identity, is the source of our thoughts and our feelings and what we say and the actions we take and the results that we get.
That was exactly the end of our conversation. I'm so excited that you said that, because it morphed into this later conversation, which I say a lot. I ask that question all the time. Who do you want to be? 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 Because that is so true. And when we focus on the becoming, right, we have to be this person, then all those things fall into place, right? Almost like naturally. But I mean, of course there's work, but it was that end of the conversation. That said, ultimately it comes down to, do you want to be, we talked about his end goal, we talked about how he wants to, his mission in life, and he wants to create spaces where we can live with, nature together, and we can use technology to be able to do that, and all of these things, and not make it political, and actually do real things that make a difference. And it's so, he was getting teary-eyed, and I said, okay, well, what does that mean today, if you want to do that, right? Do you guys see how this is exactly how I mentor people? This is exactly how Reverend Daniel mentors people. You start with that end goal, right? And then you work backwards. So we start with that end goal. What do you want your kids to be like when they're 24? I love that. So talking about making choices and being who we are, how do we create a lifestyle around that? So how do we create, and I know this is a big question, but thinking about a culture, thinking about how, our family dynamics, how do we create a vibrant living space where we're constantly just going, we're getting better, we're looking reflectively, and we're asking questions like that?
Yeah, wonderful. I love that question. Well, you'll know very well what I mean when I say this. Actually, I'll use Thoreau, one of my favorite philosophers, said, "Who you are speaks so loudly, nobody hears a word you say." I
Mm-hmm.
paraphrase slightly, right? And we as parents know, right, that children don't follow what we say, they follow what we do. But really, if we go again upstream from what we do, that comes from who we are being. So you said it in your opening statements here on the show today very well, which is who we are creates the culture, right? So you and your husband being so into learning and leadership and success, right? That's you've become that. That's who you naturally are. So that's what radiates out around you. And to make that more practical, though, what I do for myself and what I do with my clients is we don't just say, well, who do I want to be? That's useful. That's a good start. But then we actually use a scientific method to create ourselves into that being, right? It's a process that sometimes I call self-creation, right? It's a part of self-mastery. It's designing who is it? Who am I at my best? That's what I call the supreme self. What is my supreme self? And then we have a process to develop that and cultivate and activate it on a daily basis, because it's not automatic, it's not intuitive. We all come from some level of conditioning, right? So if we want to become who we're capable of being, there's some intention and action involved in that. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I absolutely love that you talk about the example, because that is everything, right? We as parents are the thermostats in our home. And so it's really important to make sure that creating that culture starts with us. You guys know I talk about that all the time. So whatever we want our kids to do, we have to set the example with that. And that is exactly why I have those questions about you in the Love of Learning assessment, because if you don't have a high level of love of learning, your kids won't either, right? An uninspired person is not very inspiring. And so it's really, I love that you also talked about that supreme version of yourself, because just the words saying that and thinking about that, it's something so beautiful. You can't help but smile about it, right? Internally, even that supreme version of myself. For me, that's such a beautiful way to think about that. And then working intentionally to apply it every single day. So in terms of working intentionally, I know everybody starts in a different place, and everybody's got a different focus, but generally speaking, how would you take the first step into being that supreme self?
Well, let's put it this way. I work with and help my clients to create a supreme self manifesto, right? And by manifesto, we could say a document, a set of statements or even declarations, most of which begin with I am, right? I am brilliant, I am wise, I am smart, I'm someone who loves learning, right? First, though, it's useful for all of us to look at the manifesto that we currently have, right? And a lot of people will say, well, I don't have a manifesto. Like, yeah, actually you do. Everybody does, because we all have beliefs about ourselves, whether we speak them out loud or we just think them in our head. We all say things like, I'm the kind of person that, I'm lucky, I'm fat, I'm smart, I'm weak, I'm rich, I'm poor, I'm tall, right? All of those things, it's a compilation of declarations, is our existing manifesto. And here's the important and challenging component with that. A lot of people, everybody to some degree, has a whole bunch of things on that manifesto that aren't so nice, right? There are a bunch of things on there that we could just call self-judgment, mean thoughts, right? I suck, I'm a loser, I'm dumb, I'm not gonna, all these thoughts. Some of us got them brought to us from external sources. Some of us, either way though, we took them on. So the very first step to create the supreme self manifesto is to, one, recognize what the current manifesto is. That's not enough, because just that's pretty depressing. Once we realize it, though, to actually heal it, to forgive ourselves for the judgments we hold against ourselves, right? If I, like, for me, as a kid, I was fat. And so for years, long beyond when my body was fat, I still saw myself as fat. So when I discovered this, I realized, wow, I'm still holding a judgment that I'm fat, right? And so I needed to, in order to create my supreme self manifesto, I needed to forgive myself for that judgment, for hurting myself like that. And when we do that, and this is the last thing I'll say on this piece right now, when we do that forgiveness, then the seeds of our supreme self manifesto emerge. They just come. It's like a hot air balloon. It's ready to go up. If we just cut the strings, the sandbags, right? Those self judgments, it takes off.
I don't know about y'all, but I just got some chills when he was talking about cutting those strings, because that is so true for all of us. That is the very first step that we do in the Inspiring Lifelong Learning program, is talking about those limiting beliefs that we have surrounding us. I was just talking to a mom yesterday, and she was saying she was actually a teacher. So she actually taught elementary school, and she's afraid that she won't be able know enough to teach her little elementary kids. And I was like, girl, come on now. Come on, right? Come on. We got to do this. We got to do this. You can totally do this. And let's just say, I mean, I will be the first to say I was a high school English teacher and they don't teach us how to teach. So I will tell you that. However, this is such a beautiful metaphor of that hot air balloon going up, us cutting the strings. And I really feel like that is definitely the most important step that people can take, is that confronting what's already in front of us that we don't acknowledge, right? I love that. That's such a beautiful thing. So living your best life, and I say living your best life, living your best homeschool, living your most vibrant life. I love that word even more because it really creates a bigger picture of what we're doing in a higher energy level that we're putting out in the world. But what kind of vibrant life, if we're truly living our vibrant life, what does that look like?
Well, it's different for everybody, right? That's one of the most beautiful things about it, is it's based on who we are in our hearts. And I take it to a spiritual level with the belief that we're all here on the earth at this time for a specific reason, right? The Hindus call it dharma. In Japan, it's called ikigai. And what it means is you, Cami, me, Daniel, right? My daughter, your son, everybody, they have this unique, special purpose that not only is medicine for the world, it's the key to one's vibrancy, one's happiness, one's fulfillment in life, right? And for some people, that's, being a freedom scholar and coaching people and helping people, educating them on how to create a life that's based on learning and the love of learning, right? For others, it's being an author. For others, it's being an accountant. Or I'm on Maui, we got surfers out. Like, I can look at the North Shore out here and see surfers. So it's different for everybody. But one thing for sure is it's by choice, and it's exciting, right? It's alive. And again, it's the opposite of the cult of men, where people are just going through the motions, just getting by. Doesn't mean that it's always easy, because if we're really on our path and we're really living a vibrant life, there are always more challenges. We're here to learn and grow and expand and live up to our highest potential. And that means sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable and difficult. However, there's also joy in that, because as we expand, we lift up again. It's like we get fulfillment from the expansion, from overcoming our old limits.
That is such a huge, huge point. And I'm so glad that you talked about that, because can you guys see the energy and the purpose flowing through Reverend Daniel right now? Because I can, and I know that I recognize it right away. It's such a passion. And somebody asked me one time, he was another business owner, asked me, oh, I'm sure you've probably had lots of times where you've thought, oh, I'm just going to give this up. I'm just going to give it up and go back to teaching or go back and be a stay-at-home mom or whatever the case. And I was like, never once, never once, never once. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is my mission, mine to what's yours, right? What's yours to do in the world. And I can see that on Reverend Daniel. Absolutely. What is that higher and moving people through that to get to their own is such a huge thing. And so me being on that journey, Daniel being on that journey shows our kids that it's possible for them. That even seeking it is possible for them. And that it's something that is the most fulfilling. And if they seek it for themselves, right, then they will eventually, when they, as long as they're moving forward with it, they will have that fulfillment. And ultimately, that's a lot of what we seek for our kids. And I know, so what do you think as far as taking a first step into that? What do we need to, how do we find that purpose, that mission, that dharma?
How do we find our mission, our dharma? Well, the first is to be aware that it's there, right? And there's a great quotation from one of the Hindu Vedas that says, right, your dharma is your purpose in life. If you don't know what your purpose in life is, your purpose is to find your purpose, right?
I love that.
And so, and
Yes.
there are lots of different ways. I mean, one of the classics is to do a vision quest, right? And what is a vision quest? Well, if we break it down to its simplest form, it's not being busy with all the stuff that keeps me distracted all the time. I mean, not that that's a problem or challenge for anybody in today's modern world, joking, right? But like to stop doing the stuff that's pulling us down or distracting us. So a vision quest, it might be going out into the wilderness and fasting and camping out for 4 days on one's own. Or it might be sitting in a room for an hour without doing any social media, just quiet. It might mean meditating 10 minutes a day every day. There's so many different ways to do it. It's tuning in, listening to our heart, to spirit, the universe, however we want to put it. Right. And of course, there are lots of amazing tools for that now, right? From books and courses and coaches and mentors. I guess the one thing I would say is, the last thing I'll say on that is just don't settle for anything less, right? It's our birthright, it's our destiny, it's our responsibility, because the world is hurt by people resentfully living, and the world is uplifted by people choosing to create lives rather than live them by default.
Oh my gosh. 100%. So a rising tide raises all ships, right? That's something I talk about that a lot with my son. And this is, if we're all truly living our purpose or mission, then we definitely raise the vibration, the energy, the goodness, the freedom of the world in a way. And it doesn't take all of us, but it does take intention, and it does take those of us who are really focused on wanting that for our kids and wanting that for ourselves. And something I share a lot with people is, what is that thing that hurt, like when you hear about it in the news, that problem in the world, something happens and it just like hits you in the gut. For me, it was the loss of freedom. It just people not understanding and then losing freedoms. It's like a sucker punch for me, and get me teary-eyed, and I'm just teary-eyed thinking about it. And my son is the same for living like people, animals. It started with animals and wild animals. Every time he thinks about wild animals going extinct or being hurt, I mean, the tears start flowing. What is, that's a sign, that's something about you that really hits you individually. So I love that you said that. And this is such a beautiful talk, because we're really getting into the bigger picture of what we're really doing. What are we really doing here? What are we really homeschooling for? What are we really being intentional for? We decided to take ownership of our homeschool for a reason. Yeah, it was because our kids weren't getting what they needed in school. They were getting bullied. Whatever the case. but you decided to make a choice and take ownership. But now what are you going to do with it? Right. And so, Daniel, last thought, if you had just one tip, something you could give to parents to live a more vibrant life. I know we've talked about so many things, but what's one lasting thought you'd like to give them?
It's one of the biggest challenges I see for parents, and I was a single solo parent for a lot of my daughter's life. One of the biggest challenges I see is so hard to just keep up with it all. There's so much to do and it's so busy, and that often translates to a belief for a lot of parents, there isn't time for me, right? And it's essential to make time for self-creation, because we live in a world more than ever before that is inputting who we should do, how we should think, what we should be focused on in our lives, right? There's just so much stimulus coming to us all the time. So absolutely important, I would say essential to have a great life, is to create it by creating self. And even if that means 10 minutes early in the morning before anybody else is up, make that a priority, right? Because if we don't create ourselves, everything around us will create us, and that's living in reaction.
I couldn't give a better piece of advice for sure. That is awesome. And I really think that everybody should reach out to you. I know that you have an ebook and some video tips on your website, an ebook, Vibrantly Alive, and some video tips there at, tell us the website again, danielaaron.com, right?
Yeah, my website's just my name, Daniel Aaron. That's Aaron, Aaron, danielaaron.com. And yeah, there's a PDF with my top tips for vibrant living, with a little video training that comes with it. So if you put my website, danielaaron.com/tips, TIPS, you can get that totally for free.
You guys, this is such a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much, Reverend Daniel, for sharing with us today. And I have been uplifted. I know that our audience has as well. And thank you for raising our energy, raising our possibility, and thinking more about our supreme self. That is such a beautiful conversation. I will talk to you guys next week. We will have another fabulous guest. Thank you. Bye-bye.